A question you might be asking is, why do we need a new leadership model? What is it about Learn, Lead, Lift that makes it so great that I really should be paying attention? I've got all these other models and theories that I've learned throughout my career or learned in school. Do I really need to add one more to my toolkit? We're going to spend some time looking at the business case for why we all need to evolve how we think and execute around leadership. And to do that, I'm going to walk you through 21st century leadership calculus, the most concise way that we've come up with to explain. I like acronyms because they help me remember things. And through 21st century leadership calculus, I'll be introducing you to 3 of them. On your screen, left to right, are 3 different phrases. One is depth, the second is VUCA, and the third on the far right is I eat. Depth generates and intensifies VUCA, and VUCA creates the need for what we call I eat leadership. Let's dig into each of these acronyms in more detail. Starting with depth, the first element is demographic changes. The composition of our workforce is far more diverse today than it was 30 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. And it's projected to continue growing more diverse over the next couple of decades. We're in a period of time right now where a lot of demographic factors are changing and shifting simultaneously. I'll share with you just a few of them. One of the first and most economically impactful is the change in the average age of a worker. We're entering a time where our workforce is shrinking, and a majority of our population in well-developed economies like the US is going to be made up of people who may want to work but literally can't work due to an age-related disability, for example. This older population is going to be much larger, and our working population is going to be relatively smaller than it has been compared to the elderly population. So what does this mean? Well, it means that workers today and over the next 20 years are going to have unprecedented responsibility for aging parents and other relatives. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on people of all ages to continue working as long as possible. The other thing that's really significant in terms of demographics is that we are noticing a tremendous shift in terms of how workers self-identify around race, ethnicity, and gender. 30 years ago, we were still majority white identifying in the US, but going into the future, our workforce will be majority Latinx and/or mixed race. Additionally, 30% of people entering the workforce today know someone who identifies as genderqueer or gender fluid. A key question for leaders to ask themselves now is, how do differing life experiences associated with identity impact the life of a worker now compared to 20 or 30 years ago? Next, we have extreme weather. Extreme weather events are related to climate change. So regardless of what we believe might be the cause or best solutions to deal with climate change, it's well validated that our climate is changing. And that's having a significant impact on the lives of most workers today. Climate change is projected to have an even stronger effect going forward. There will be a reduction in habitable zones caused by increased flooding, wildfires, extreme cold, extreme heat, etc. These conditions will generate increasing levels of disruption in terms of where and how people live. Extreme weather and the circumstances it creates is something we need to pay attention to as leaders, and we need to plan for its impact on people. Another contribution to depth that intensifies VUCA is pandemics. COVID-19 was a recent example of the impact that pandemics can have on daily life. Unfortunately, it's not projected to be the last pandemic in our lifetime. Therefore, we need to be prepared for the fact that as people relocate due to climate change, as people age, as things change for all of us in terms of how we live and work together, and the composition of our communities changes, That's going to drive additional emergence of pandemics and other issues. Technology is another megatrend that we can see quite visibly has changed a great deal in the last 20 to 30 years. And that change is continuing to accelerate. This can be a huge benefit for organizations and for workers, but it's also a huge disruptor. A good example of that is AI, or artificial intelligence. We know that AI has a lot of potential and promise in terms of being a beneficial augmenter to the work that we do. But we also know that it can displace many workers. We don't know yet exactly what's going to emerge due to the integration of AI into our lives and into our businesses. So today, it's a question mark, but we know that it's going to be impactful as a mega trend. Technology innovations tend to put pressure on our workforce and our organizations in novel ways. While we can't always anticipate what those pressures are going to be, we can anticipate that there will be some. Finally, our understanding of health is evolving. For much of history, health was understood as the absence of disease. It was thought that if a person doesn't have an acute disease right now, then they're healthy. What we see now is an emerging awareness that health is multidimensional. Things like mental health, financial health, spiritual health, and community health all matter to workers as much or more than physical health, or the mere absence of disease. As our shared definitions of health continue to expand and evolve, they become more complex, and they generate different expectations from workers as to what kind of support for health companies should provide. Workers will increasingly determine what they require to leverage and maximize health across these multiple dimensions. And they're going to care about when and where they can access the resources they need to support health. Depth creates VUCA. VUCA is a term that was coined by the U.S. military in the 1990s, and it was an effort to describe battlefield conditions, which are inherently volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. VUCA has always been with us. We could look back through all of human history and point to times where VUCA was operating, or it was a good description for the dynamics that were happening. However, I think it's safe to say that due to the megatrends that I just shared, VUCA is more intense now than it's ever been. And that's another pattern that's accelerating. When you have depth, which puts pressure on both workers and organizations, pressures that are new, and you pair that with VUCA, which introduces volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity into the context in which we're doing business, that creates the mandate for change in terms of how do we think about and execute on leadership in 4 specific ways. We need leaders now to be inclusive, equity-minded, authentic, and trauma-informed. Why? Because these 4 characteristics are what enable leaders and their organizations to adapt in the face of changing conditions, to maintain organizational health and increase individual and collective resilience. Depth creates VUCA, which requires I eat leadership. This is why we need a new leadership model. Let's pause for a moment here and think about what we mean exactly when we talk about inclusive, equity-minded, authentic, and trauma-informed. The nuances associated with each of these terms are very important. While I walk you through these definitions, I invite you to reflect and notice what comes up for you. Some of these terms may make you uncomfortable. They might evoke curiosity. There's no right or wrong response to how these terms resonate with you. However, it is important information that as you increase your understanding, you increase your self-awareness and your ability to integrate these into your leadership practice. Sometimes our discomfort is an indicator to us that we have a learning edge. It may be a term or a feeling that's unfamiliar or ambiguous, and maybe you simply need clarity. Other times, it's an indicator that you have an opportunity to grow in your understanding or in your skill set. However you receive this information now, and however that evolves as you progress through your learning journey, I invite you to simply notice when that happens, so you can assess what the next step is for you. Starting with inclusive, there are, as with leadership, many different definitions. The definition for inclusive that we will be working with is active, not passive. When we talk about I Eat leadership, we're talking about including everyone and being both active and intentional in doing that, especially with people who have been historically excluded because of how they identify. Similarly, in the context of Learn, Lead, Lift and I Eat leadership, being equity-minded means taking an active stance toward building equity. As leaders, we actively seek to identify and provide what individuals need to access experiences and opportunities. Authentic is another term that people can become confused about. What we mean by authentic is not the same as personal expression. In other words, dressing any way you want, getting a tattoo or body piercing, or not worrying about how you present yourself. None of those are what we mean by authenticity. All of the things I just described are forms of expression. And we're not going to debate whether they're right or wrong, good or bad. What we're interested in when we talk about authenticity in this course is actively affirming that no one is perfect. It's having the maturity and the self-awareness to acknowledge that even as leaders, we're not perfect. And that is powerful because it is one of the strongest enablers for fostering psychological safety. Psychological safety is an essential ingredient for high performance on teams. You can have a lot of impact on the performance of your teams just by becoming more authentic as a leader. Finally, trauma-informed. In industry, we've just started to talk about trauma-informed leadership. It hasn't been well understood or talked about much prior to just a couple of years ago. In this course, we're not going to make you an expert on trauma or teach you how to do therapy with people suffering from trauma, because both of those are beyond your scope of practice as a leader. When we talk about trauma-informed, we simply mean that you'll have a baseline understanding of trauma and how it impacts people. With this knowledge, you can cultivate a range of responses in your leadership that will enhance psychological safety and prevent and mitigate additional harm. As leaders, we may unintentionally create more harm at times because we're unaware of what trauma is and when someone's experiencing it. It's important to know enough that you're not going to cause additional harm and that you're increasing psychological safety. This way, you can have an appropriate and a constructive response that is still within your scope of practice as a leader. Now, I would like to invite you to pause this recording and refer to your course compass to answer these questions. First, why do you want to be a leader? Second, think about a leadership challenge you are currently experiencing. What does future success look like for you in that scenario, for your team, and your organization? And if you don't succeed, how will that impact you and other stakeholders? If you've already completed this, that's great. Go ahead and review, and then feel free to reflect on and modify your answers if you need to. Welcome back. Your course compass is a tool that you'll want to have on hand to refer to throughout the course. And you'll want to return to this tool as a way to measure how much you've learned.